King Charles has named his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh.
The path, of course, is not always smooth, and may at times this year have felt quite bumpy, but small steps can make a world of difference.
Royal watchers and curious fans around the world were left surprised when quiet whispers began spreading about something hidden inside Prince Edward's royal title. What initially sounded like a small technical detail slowly turned into a much bigger mystery, as insiders suggested that Queen Elizabeth II may have deliberately left a message in plain sight that could still influence the royal family's future. The situation became more serious when a formal legal letter stamped with the official seal of Edinburgh solicitors arrived on the desk of King Charles III inside Buckingham Palace. What appeared to be a routine matter quickly took a different direction, raising concerns within the palace that this was not just about tradition, but about authority. It forced officials to confront an uncomfortable reality. Royal titles are not always symbolic. In certain cases, they carry legal significance that can affect decisions at the highest level. For more than 30 years, Prince Edward had been seen as a quiet and dependable figure, often staying out of public controversy. However, behind that calm image, something far more calculated had been put in place. Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II had spent decades shaping a protective structure around their youngest son. This was not about public recognition, but about safeguarding the royal family's long-term interests, including shielding key assets from internal shifts in power, particularly as the influence of Queen Camilla continued to grow. The origins of this move trace back to November 19, 1947, when King George VI issued a royal command known as Letters Patent. Through this, he created the title Duke of Edinburgh for Prince Philip. At the time, it appeared to be a standard royal gesture, but the legal language within the document was carefully constructed and far more significant than it seemed. Unlike most titles, which are largely ceremonial, this one was designed with long-term implications. It included clauses that would not simply disappear over time. Instead, those provisions remained in place, effectively dormant, until the right successor inherited them. When Prince Philip passed away in 2021, many within the palace assumed that whatever authority was attached to the title had ended. The role was treated as symbolic, waiting to be reassigned. However, the original 1947 document remained legally intact, preserving its conditions and potential influence. That changed in June 2022 during the Platinum Jubilee of Elizabeth II. Publicly, it appeared to be a personal and emotional gesture when Queen Elizabeth II gave the Duke of Edinburgh title to Prince Edward. However, the specific wording used by the palace was critical. The title was described as being conferred, not granted. This distinction carried legal meaning. To grant a title suggests creating it anew, while to confer it implies passing on an existing title along with all its original conditions and legal framework. In effect, Edward did not just receive a name, but the full structure that came with it. By choosing Edward, a figure known for loyalty and discretion, the Queen ensured that these powers would be held by someone unlikely to misuse them. This decision reflected long-term planning rather than a simple act of recognition. The reason for keeping this arrangement quiet becomes clearer when considering the broader context. Queen Elizabeth II had closely observed internal dynamics within the royal family, including the increasing influence of Queen Camilla over King Charles III. This was not framed as a personal issue, but as a matter of institutional stability. Significant private estates, such as Sandringham House and Balmoral Castle, valued at hundreds of millions of pounds, could become subject to changes in management or control. The Queen's decision appears to have been aimed at ensuring these assets remain protected from rapid restructuring. In this context, Prince Edward's role can be seen as a form of internal safeguard. Certain conditions attached to his title could allow him to challenge or delay decisions if they conflicted with the original legal framework tied to the estates. This placed him in a position somewhat comparable to Princess Anne in terms of influence over specific matters. By late 2023, King Charles III began making efforts to reorganize royal finances and property management. His approach focused on modernization, including reviewing income streams and estate structures. While these moves were presented as practical reforms, they also raised questions about long-term control. The situation escalated when a formal legal notice was sent on behalf of Prince Edward. This was not informal communication, but a structured legal response. The document reportedly argued that certain actions taken by the king conflicted with provisions outlined in the original 1947 Letters Patent. At that point, attention shifted to the historical significance of the title itself. The Duke of Edinburgh has traditionally been associated with reliability and duty within the royal family, often held by individuals seen as stabilizing figures rather than public-facing leaders. Edward's path to receiving the title had not been guaranteed. Reports suggested that King Charles III had considered alternative options, including retaining the title or allowing it to lapse. However, Queen Elizabeth II intervened directly, making her intentions clear. She viewed Edward as uniquely suited for the role due to his consistent loyalty, private nature, and absence of public controversy. His marriage to Sophie Rhys-Jones and his decision to avoid media conflicts reinforced this perception. Even after her passing, the structure she established continues to have an impact. By relying on the original legal framework from 1947, she ensured that her influence would persist beyond her lifetime through institutional mechanisms rather than personal authority. As legal experts began reviewing long-dormant documents, it became evident that Prince Edward's position carried more weight than previously understood. He was no longer seen simply as a background figure, but as someone holding specific legal leverage within the system. While public attention remained focused on ceremonial events like the Jubilee, more strategic decisions were taking place behind closed doors. Queen Elizabeth II's actions during her final years reflected a clear intention to stabilize the monarchy's future. She understood King Charles III's tendencies toward reform and his responsiveness to close advisors, including Queen Camilla. Her approach appears to have been designed to balance those influences by reinforcing legal protections established decades earlier. By reactivating the framework tied to the Duke of Edinburgh title, she effectively ensured that certain royal assets and decisions would remain subject to long-standing legal conditions. These provisions limit the ability of any single figure, including the monarch, to make unilateral changes to key parts of the royal estate. In the end, what once appeared to be a quiet and symbolic appointment revealed itself as part of a much larger strategy, one rooted in law, legacy, and long-term control over the monarchy's future. Instead, these assets were placed into a protected legal structure, where the Duke of Edinburgh would act as a constitutional guardian, quietly overseeing everything and ensuring that nothing essential to the royal family's future could be altered too easily. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip designed this system with precision, making sure it could not be easily undone or influenced by shifting internal dynamics. Their objective was straightforward but powerful. No royal spouse, regardless of influence or proximity to the monarch, should ever be able to convince the crown to sell, redirect, or interfere with wealth that had already been set aside for future generations. This was about preservation, not control, and about protecting a legacy that extended far beyond any single reign. That responsibility ultimately fell to Prince Edward, a figure many had long underestimated. Known for his quiet presence and careful approach, he now stood in a position that carried far more weight than the public had ever assumed. Beneath that reserved image was a role carefully prepared for him over decades, one that placed him at the center of a hidden legal safeguard tied directly to the future of the House of Windsor. The question then becomes what the Queen truly saw in Edward. It was not charisma or public dominance, but something far less visible and arguably more important. She recognized in him the same controlled discipline that defined Prince Philip, the ability to remain steady under pressure and to prioritize duty over personal visibility. This was not a dramatic or attention-seeking kind of strength. It was the kind that holds systems together quietly, especially when those systems begin to face internal strain. When Edward inherited the legal authority tied to the 1947 framework, his position shifted significantly. He was no longer simply a royal holding a title, but a functional part of the structure designed to maintain balance within the monarchy. In practical terms, his role introduced a form of internal oversight. While King Charles III remained the central authority, Edward's position created a counterbalance, ensuring that certain decisions could be reviewed or challenged if they conflicted with long-standing legal protections. This was not opposition, but a form of structural control built into the system itself. There are parallels here with Princess Anne, who is known for her disciplined management of royal responsibilities, particularly in areas tied to estates and agriculture. However, Edward's authority extended further into legal territory. He was not just managing responsibilities, but holding a framework that could directly influence outcomes. This included the ability, under specific conditions, to challenge decisions that might affect private estates such as Balmoral Castle. If any proposed changes risked altering how income or ownership structures were handled in a way that conflicted with established protections, Edward's legal team had the standing to intervene. These were not informal objections or internal disagreements. They were grounded in formal legal provisions. One of the key elements within the original documents was an anti-invalidation clause. In simple terms, this meant that the rights and protections outlined in those documents could not be easily removed or overridden. In most circumstances, the authority of a monarch carries significant weight in shaping internal decisions. However, the letters patent issued in 1947 were not ordinary instructions. They were formal legal instruments, and their provisions exist independently of personal preference or temporary leadership. Queen Elizabeth II ensured that the protections attached to the Duke of Edinburgh title were secured within this framework. This meant they could not be weakened or bypassed without substantial legal justification. It was a deliberate design, one that only revealed its full implications once circumstances began to test it. When King Charles III moved forward in 2023 with plans to modernize and reorganize aspects of royal finances, the assumption was that such authority rested fully with him. His approach focused on efficiency and restructuring, particularly in relation to estate management and income distribution. What was less visible at the time was that the act of passing the Duke of Edinburgh title to Edward had already activated the underlying legal protections. By doing so, a mechanism was put into place that could review or challenge structural changes, especially those affecting long-established estates. This created a situation that had clearly been anticipated. Queen Elizabeth II understood that her son, out of duty and respect, would honor her decision regarding Edward's title. In doing so, he would also step into a legal framework that had been prepared long before. As Edward's legal representatives began to formally question aspects of estate management, particularly those involving Scottish properties, internal tensions increased. The situation was not openly discussed, but within the palace it created a noticeable divide. Those aligned closely with Queen Camilla viewed Edward's actions as unnecessary resistance. From their perspective, it appeared as though outdated legal structures were being used to slow down reforms that were intended to modernize the monarchy. Others interpreted the situation differently. Supporters of Edward's position argued that he was fulfilling a responsibility that had been carefully entrusted to him. Rather than opposing the king, they saw him as upholding a system designed to ensure stability and fairness over the long term. This difference in perspective shaped the broader narrative. Was Edward acting as an opportunist during a sensitive period, particularly as the king faced health challenges? Or was he carrying out a role specifically intended to protect the institution from unintended consequences? Behind the scenes, what emerged was less about personal conflict and more about legal interpretation. The framework established in 1947 began to take on renewed importance, revealing that the title of Duke of Edinburgh was never intended to be purely ceremonial. At its core, it was tied to the preservation of the Windsor family's private foundation. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip understood that independence for the monarchy depended heavily on control over private estates such as Sandringham House and Balmoral. Without them, future generations of the royal family could become more dependent on state structures. To prevent that, the legal structure included what has been described as an irrevocable covenant of management. This provision allowed the Duke of Edinburgh to hold a form of co-trustee authority over specific income streams and estate-related decisions. This authority was not personal to Edward, but attached to the title itself. When it was conferred upon him in 2022, he inherited that legal standing. In practical terms, this meant he could delay or block structural changes that might affect the continuity of these estates. This was not symbolic. It represented one of the most significant internal legal mechanisms within the monarchy. Much like Princess Anne holds defined authority over specific operational areas, Edward's role extended into financial oversight tied directly to legacy assets. When King Charles III explored restructuring elements of Balmoral's financial framework in 2023, he encountered these limits directly. Edward's legal team referenced the 1947 provisions, demonstrating that certain changes could not proceed without addressing those conditions. In effect, a boundary had been set decades earlier, and it remained in force. The monarchy could evolve in many ways, but not all elements were subject to immediate change. Choosing Edward for this role reflected a calculated decision. Exercising such authority required someone who would not use it for personal visibility or advantage. His track record of discretion and consistency made him a predictable and stable holder of that responsibility. Historically, the Duke of Edinburgh title has been associated with figures known for discipline and support of the crown. Edward's decades of low-profile service reinforced the perception that he would act within the intended limits of the role. When the formal legal notice reached Buckingham Palace, the response was immediate but quiet. The situation was handled internally, with minimal public acknowledgement. At the same time, King Charles III was managing both institutional responsibilities and personal health challenges. This created a complex situation. Addressing the issue publicly could raise questions about the limits of royal authority and the extent to which previous decisions continued to shape current governance. In the end, what unfolded was not a sudden conflict, but the activation of a system designed long ago. A system built on law rather than personality, and one that continues to operate quietly within the structure of the monarchy. To accept the situation privately would mean acknowledging something far more serious. It would mean admitting that Queen Camilla's influence over key royal estates had already been legally limited. That realization raised a deeper question about what was really hidden inside the Duke of Edinburgh title, and whether the palace had fully understood it all along. In the final months of 2023, as winter settled over Windsor, a quiet but significant shift took place behind palace walls. This was not driven by headlines or public controversy. It came from a set of aging documents written decades earlier that suddenly regained relevance. When King Charles III received a formal legal letter from representatives of Prince Edward, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace changed almost immediately. What had been routine palace life quickly took on a more serious tone. The situation moved from private discussion into something closer to legal confrontation. At the center of this was the 1947 letters patent issued by King George VI. For years, it had been treated as a historical formality, a document tied to tradition rather than authority. However, closer examination revealed that it carried legal weight that had never disappeared. Many within royal circles had long believed that titles functioned mainly as symbols, representing honor and continuity without affecting real decision-making power. That assumption no longer held. The 1947 document, reviewed carefully in later years by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, included provisions that directly connected the Duke of Edinburgh to the protection of private royal estates. These estates, including Sandringham House and Balmoral Castle, are not controlled by the state but owned privately by the Windsor family. Under the original framework, the Duke of Edinburgh held a defined role in safeguarding them. Two legal mechanisms stood out within the document. One was a reversionary interest, and the other a negative covenant. In simple terms, these provisions meant that while the king remained the official owner, he could not make major structural decisions regarding these estates without the consent of the Duke of Edinburgh. By late 2023 and into early 2024, the situation began to center on a growing concern within the royal structure. Observers suggested that modernization efforts led by King Charles III were influenced in part by Queen Camilla and her advisors. The issue was not modernization itself, but the possibility that it could reshape control over long-standing family assets. If these assets were consolidated into a single financial structure under the king, it could affect the independence of other members of the royal family, particularly Prince Edward and Princess Anne. This concern appears to have been anticipated well in advance. Although Queen Elizabeth II was no longer alive to intervene directly, her earlier decision in June 2022 during the Platinum Jubilee of Elizabeth II had already set a legal mechanism in motion. By conferring the Duke of Edinburgh title on Edward, she ensured that the protections embedded in the 1947 document remained active. It is widely believed that she understood King Charles III would honor this decision out of duty and respect. In doing so, he also accepted the legal framework attached to the title, including its limitations. One of the most significant aspects of the original letters patent was the inclusion of an anti-invalidation clause. This provision meant that the rights tied to the title could not simply be overridden by the monarch. Any attempt to remove or alter them would require formal legislative action, not just internal royal decision-making. This raised questions about why Prince Edward had been chosen for such a role. His public image had long been defined by discretion and consistency rather than influence. For decades, he remained largely outside of public controversy, focusing on responsibilities without seeking attention. That pattern of behavior appears to have been a key factor. He was seen as someone unlikely to use authority for personal advantage or to disrupt the balance within the family. Instead, he represented stability and predictability. Over time, it became clear that his strength was not in visibility, but in patience. While others faced public scrutiny, Edward maintained a steady presence, building a reputation based on reliability rather than prominence. This made him a suitable figure to hold a role that required restraint. When reports of the legal framework began to circulate, reactions were divided. Some interpreted Edward's actions as protective, aligning with what they believed were Queen Elizabeth II's long-term intentions. Others viewed it as poorly timed, given the broader challenges facing the royal family, including the king's health and other ongoing concerns. The timing added complexity to the situation. Raising legal objections while King Charles III was managing serious health issues could be seen as placing additional pressure on an already strained environment. Critics suggested it risked appearing opportunistic. However, others argued that the timing was dictated not by personal choice, but by circumstance. If structural changes were being considered, then any legal response would naturally follow at that moment. When the palace chose not to respond publicly to the legal letter, it signaled something beyond simple disagreement. Internally, the issue was taken seriously. Legal advisors and external experts were brought in to review the implications of the 1947 document. At that point, the matter shifted from internal family dynamics to formal legal interpretation. The question was no longer about intent, but about what the law allowed and what it restricted. The focus quickly turned to Sandringham and Balmoral. Plans to centralize income from these estates were viewed by some as practical reforms, but by others as a concentration of control. Edward's legal representatives argued that such changes conflicted with the original provisions. By invoking those provisions, Edward effectively introduced a legal requirement for consent. From that moment forward, decisions affecting these estates could not proceed unilaterally. This demonstrated the practical impact of the anti-invalidation clause. It created a situation where authority was shared in a very specific way, limiting the ability of any one figure to act independently in relation to certain assets. For King Charles III, known for his respect for institutional structures, this presented a complex challenge. The legal framework established decades earlier could not be ignored without undermining the very system he represented. What had once been considered a ceremonial title was now clearly something else. The Duke of Edinburgh had become a role with defined legal influence, capable of shaping decisions at the highest level of the monarchy. Prince Edward did not need public statements or media engagement. The authority he held was embedded in the legal system itself. The document spoke on his behalf. When the letter arrived at Buckingham Palace, it was not simply a disagreement between brothers. It marked the activation of a long-standing legal structure, one that had remained hidden in plain sight for decades. From that point on, every major decision concerning the royal family's private estates required a new level of consideration. The balance of authority had shifted, not through confrontation, but through law.